I could never endanger myself, that's what I felt. Looking around, all of the sights, all of the sounds. So many people just running around, fleeing the towns, abandoned their homes, giving their lives with nowhere to go. No one to know the truth, just go with the flow. Just know you're never alone. Now I'm educated, got perspective from the top. Shit is regulated, we just gotta make it stop. So I'm calling on my rebels, yeah, you coming, no you're not. Making a stand up, time to take a shot. Okay.
At a safe distance from the fortress, I took up the battle with the beasts that had clung to me. It was not so difficult to get rid of those on the outside of my trousers, but for those that had made their way up the legs on the inside, it was not so simple. I was compelled to rid myself of the insignia of man by removing the trousers as speedily as possible. Hardly a very dignified position for the great adventurer who had been so ready to attack the castle. It was a complete victory for the citizens, fine people indeed, whose city is a robber's castle supported by slaughter and murder. When I tackled the males or queens of the bulldog ants, my plight was even worse than when I had to deal with the workers. It was a few weeks later. I was present at a high menial flight. The air was full of loving creatures. Many hundreds, possibly thousands, swarmed around me. I had imagined that upon so festal a day they might be a little more merciful, being concerned with love and nothing else. That was their chief concern. It is true, pairs flying and settling all around. But I was by no means forgotten. I believe that they wished to inform me that among the bulldog people, the males and females could battle quite as well as the workers, and even better because they could fly. I was attacked from all sides and felt their stingers, which are 1/4 of an inch long. I never ran away so quickly from any other place. Since that time, my zeal to learn more about the bulldog ants has cooled notably. I know very well that I was no hero. I was a coward. But I did not feel that I wished to become a sacrifice to science. Others may attempt to study these stimulating creatures, which have not been closely examined. There is still a broad field for the eager myrmecologist, but let me warn him to cover every part of his person with steel plates. Man can protect himself easily against all kinds of ants. Even the most savage and wickedest will not harm him if he does not interfere with them. The wandering ants may overtake him like a storm. They may come down like a hailstorm, or a swarm of grasshoppers, like a plague. A person may live for many years in the tropics without encountering a lion, a tiger or a jaguar, an elephant, a rhinoceros, or a tapir, but he will make the acquaintance of the ants, whether he will or not. All wandering ants are blind. Those of the old world have no eyes at all. Those of the new world have eyes but no optic nerve. This applies only to the females and workers. The males can see very well. The workers are of all sizes, from the smallest mites to dotty burghers. They vary in color as well as in shape. The males, though winged, are 3 to 4 times as large as the largest worker, while the wingless female, with its distorted hinder body, only attains 1/8 the size. Both are so distinct from the workers that scientists have frequently erred in considering them a different species. As a consequence, there was wild confusion in naming the different species, and this has not yet been cleared up, for the females of some species have not yet been discovered. Of how the wandering ants rear their brood, or how the sexes get together, hardly anything is known, although it is clear that we have no right to speak of any actual hymeneal flight. Since the females are wingless, the males swarm from the nest, especially by night, as these wandering ants, being blind, are more active by night and avoid the sunlight. I had my first experience with wandering ants in Mexico, to which I added later other observations in tropical South America, as well as in the tropics of the Old World. The new tropical wandering ants are easier to study, because some species travel in the bright sunshine, while others, such as the old tropical, appear only at night or on very cloudy days. As I read over my notes, I find so much that is alike, and so little variation, that I can easily set down a general picture. I hold that the assumption of most students of ant life that the wandering ants have no real nests, that they only have a kind of bivouac at a fixed place for a short time, is false. I am convinced, even though I have not succeeded better than anyone else in investigating one of these nests, that nevertheless, they have a home, which may be considered a permanent nest, since they remain there for a considerable period, often for several months at a time. This seems necessary for the rearing of their brood. The wandering ants leave this nest at the change in the seasons, when the rainy season begins, or even when the dry season sets in. They may leave too, when the neighborhood no longer affords food for their tremendous numbers. Then they forage to a great distance, fixing upon a special place of encampment. While they are in their permanent nest, they go upon great plundering expeditions, from which they return to their nest. They are regular nomads, remaining in one place only so long as it affords the means of livelihood. They are Huns or gypsies, traveling from place to place. The robber nests of the Hun ants are carefully concealed, usually in the thickest part of the primeval forest, or in the impenetrable jungle amid the roots of old trees. They are defended from any attack by many 100,000 warriors of infinite bravery. It is not only difficult to estimate the number of nomad people like this, but even these estimates must be pure guesses. I have had to alter my own estimates frequently, almost giving up altogether sometimes, when I observed the mighty army of these ants marching in a seemingly endless line, covering a wide space as they went. Many travelers give the number up into the millions. I can neither prove nor deny their figures. At any rate, I saw armies more than 400 feet long, while others mention armies extending to a length of 1,400 feet. Some species march in broad columns as wide as 13 feet, while still others march in serried columns. But the marching host is always so close together that a grain of dust could not fall between them. The earth is one black mass of the crawling swarm. The emigrations or expeditions usually take place at night or on cloudy, dark days. If they are overtaken by too bright a light on their travels, the army marches through covered ways or arbors. If this is impossible, they build arched ways of various kinds. Being expert engineers, even while the march goes on, they build these sages out of the earth, using their spittle as the binder. Sometimes the larger soldiers form an arch under which the smaller soldiers march along. To the right and left of the line are individual marchers, usually of a different color, which we might well term orderlies or officers. They run hither and thither, each one seeming to have a certain part of the line in charge. These officers are quite different from the other workers. They have larger heads and very strong mandibles. At every attack, they are in the front rank of the fighting host. In the center of the marching host are the smaller warriors. They carry the brood, eggs and larvae, while the larger ones carry the booty. Very large warriors are stationed at various points as guards, and they protect both sides of the marching horde from any sudden attack. The observer is thrilled as he notes the much larger males, with eyes at each side and on the forehead, and even with wings, as they march in the center. Yet this appears to be true only of one species in the old world. At least I never saw them in America. The queen is found very seldom, yet she appears on all the marches, even in the expeditions for booty. This taking along of the helpless race mother is a kind of oppression. The underside of all the females thus far examined shows them to be most unqueenly, in a very deplorable state. The mighty army is followed by a host of different animals. Some of these, birds of all kinds, exact their offerings from the fighting line. The greatest horde consists of insects, and guests of the ants who share their joys and sorrows, especially the small flies flying above the great army. Wherever the ant army goes, it spreads terror in the insect world, for its presence means sure death. Beetles, wasps, cockroaches, woodlice, and centipedes are seized forthwith and torn to bits. It might be supposed that at least grasshoppers could save themselves by jumping away, but such is not the case. They seem to be paralyzed by fright. Their hind legs are amputated at once, and soon they are torn to bits. As soon as the army reaches a bush, an alien ant nest, a heap of leaves, or any other rich booty, a large detachment led by officers advances to the attack. The insects they pursue try to save themselves by climbing on twigs, stones, or roots, but the Huns follow them everywhere. The prey in bewilderment jumps down into the midst of the black army. Only the spiders at times succeed in escaping, by letting themselves down on a thread and hanging in the air. The nest of alien ants is taken possession of at once. The nomads are quite as fond of ant eggs and larvae as are other ants. The alien people take up the gauge of battle, but very seldom can they succeed in repelling the attack of the overwhelming host of the enemy. In most cases, Every individual ant is torn to pieces and eaten, together with all the brood. Everyone who has lived in the tropics can tell stories about ant armies which have paid him a visit at night. The gypsy ants may fear only the largest human cities, yet they seem to feel the obligation, from time to time, to see what they can get out of human nests. The bedposts are set in saucers containing vinegar or petroleum. If, on account of the heat of the night, the sleeper has not thrown off the coverings, so that they hang down to the floor, he is safe from the invading hosts while in bed. I have enjoyed more than one of these visits and managed to make my escape. We gradually learn how to act properly as hosts. But my first night with these dark maidens was bad enough. I shall not forget it, no matter how long I may live. We had been drinking pulque, a maguey whiskey, which is preferred by the Mexicans above all other drinks. It has a horrible flavor and the head you get next morning is awful. But you must try anything once if you are traveling all over the world as a writer. I have drunk worse in my time. First, you're very lively and then most emotional. We had been sitting for a long time and had drunk considerable pulque. Then I went home. I lived in a one-story bungalow which the owner styled a chalet. I was taken care of by an old Indian woman. I did not go to bed at once but sat down by the writing table. I felt the uncontrollable urge to pen a sonnet to a sing-song girl I had met in Hanko, who certainly would not understand a word of it. If she had heard of the sonnet, she would certainly have attributed it to alcohol, but she was devoted to sake, not to pulque, to rice whiskey, not maguey whiskey. I dreamt of her, and I wrote 4 lines about the sins of her slender fingers, and then 4 lines more, then 3 lines. The last 3 lines I never wrote. The ladies came a-visiting and I forgot her little finger, the sing-song girl, pulque, and sonnet. I heard a dim peep peep, then the peeping became louder. The peeping was intense. I jumped up, looked around, saw the floor covered with a black carpet. But this carpet was alive. It moved and crawled. Many thousand black ants. Half the floor of the room was covered with them. And still more were coming in. Like waves, the black masses rolled in. Instinctively, I jumped up on my chair. The peeping never stopped. Very fine, thin, many-voiced. Then a stronger, sharper, fearful peeping. I listened. It came from behind the cupboard. Yes, behind the cupboard was a mouse hole and a mouse nest in which lived Mama Mouse and her mouse children. I had heard them often as they squeaked, the little ones seeming to say, "Bring us something good to eat." And the mouse mama seemed to ask me, "Haven't you anything for me?" Every day I shared my breakfast with her, giving her bread, cheese rinds, and sausage casings. I called her Ignatz. She was a nice, lovely mouse mama. Now she was being eaten up alive. She and her naked mouse children. There is no escape when the black 6-leggers come. They climbed my chair 10, 20, 100. Did they want to make me their prey? What did these blind things know of how large I was? Mouse or man? All the same to them. I stepped on the table. My head whirled, but not from the pulque. A repulsive stench arose from the blackies, as of carrion, seeming to penetrate the pores of the skin, eating through clothing and skin. They came up to the table after me. They climbed all 4 legs of the table, swarming all over the chair as well. Its back was several inches from the table. At least those creatures could not reach me. I pulled out my handkerchief, wanting to sweep away all that reached the top of the table. They were coming over the edge, first a few, then more and more. I swept them off, balancing myself carefully. Wherever they appeared, I hurled them down into that black, moving sea. If only those mice were dead at last, thought I. But they squeaked, and squeaked ever more wildly, uncannily, hopelessly. Then I looked at the chair. It was entirely covered, with legs, a seat, and a back. But above the curved back, which stood a little higher than the table, I saw a rare drama. Garlands of ants were hanging there, as thick as your thumb, garlands of ants, and I saw how their ranks grew. How one worker turned to the other. It was fascinating. I stood motionless, staring down at the creatures. I knew that they were blind, that they could not see at all. Yet they were coming from the chair to the table, forming a living ladder. Now the first ants reached a table and poured over a matchbox. Then the black hosts swarmed upon the ladder and poured themselves all over the table. At the same time, Those climbing up the four legs of the table appeared, and the black flood rolled over the edge from every side. A second chain was completed from the chair to the table. I had to make a move, a single motion to hurl them to the floor, but the idea never occurred to me. But I had to get away. The smell of carrion was more horrible than ever. In the next few moments, they must reach me. I was nauseated at the thought. Hardly 2 feet from the table was the washstand, and in the center of it stood the large pewter pitcher filled with water. There I would be safe. One step, I stood on the washstand, and in another, I had both feet in the enormous pitcher. I noticed that the washstand was already covered with ants. Did they want to find out what soap tasted like? I had stepped among the blackies with my left foot, taking a half dozen into the pitcher with me. I fished them out of the water carefully. It was a frightful pewter pitcher in which I stood. I had worried about it for a fortnight. Now I was very glad indeed that it was not china, which would certainly have broken. I stood straight as a candle, foot to foot. I will not say that it was very comfortable. I had to stand very carefully to preserve my equilibrium. Sometimes I lifted the right foot, then the left, to rest a little. The army continued to stream into the room under the door. They covered everything now, creeping into my trunk, climbing on the sofa, clinging to the walls, here and there. They were more and more by the minute. It seemed to me that they were in layers, as if the black waves down there were rising higher. They were certainly climbing the sides of the pewter pitcher, and already were running around the edge. I could hardly bear my cramped position any longer. What if I were to jump down and leap for the door, run down the steps and out of the house? But I had the feeling that I would sink up to the knees in those black waves. I knew that it was unreasonable. I knew very well that the ants covered the floor only a fraction of an inch. Nevertheless, I felt as if I would go up to my knees. A stumble, slipping in the crushed mass, falling in the midst of them. The black living sea swarming over me. Now, for the first time, I became worried. I would not look at the ants anymore. I closed both eyes. But that peep of the mice which they were eating alive, and this gruesome odor of carrion and garbage, it seemed to me almost as if they had taken fast hold of me, as if my body, my own breath were emitting this disgusting odor. My head swam. I reeled, opened my eyes again, and stood straight with the very last atom of willpower. Then I saw how the blackies were coming into the water. They hung on the edge of the pitcher, one after the other, and dropped into the water as they built a bridge over to me, just as they had constructed a ladder from the back of the chair to the top of the table. For a minute I was very still, watching them as they worked, seeing how they lengthened their living bridge, coming nearer and nearer to my leg. I could almost calculate how long it would take them to get there. And again I became dizzy. The fearful squeaking of the mice rang in my ears. The disgusting stench was sticky in my nostrils. My eyes smarted at the sight of the black swaying waves. I thought that I felt the ants crawling all over my body and biting me in 1,000 places. It seemed to me that my mouth was filled with the black things. My tongue was parched, twisting with the awful struggle. Fear and a cold sweat. One loud shout of despair, then I jumped. I do not know why I did not do that sooner, nor do I know why I did it just at that moment. My bed was very close, hardly a yard from the washstand. I might have saved myself long before. I made one leap into the middle of the bed. Without thinking, I crept under the sheet and wrapped myself in it. I gasped, breathed. All danger was past. I knew that I was safe there. The 4 bedposts stood in pewter, saucers filled with kerosene. Not a black beast dared come near. I closed my eyes again and held my nostrils. Still that squeaking, but weaker, slowly weakening. Other rustlings which I could not explain to myself, from other creatures done to death, like the mice. Then came the sharp cry of a bird. At once it came to me that this was the blackbird in its cage, belonging to the Indian woman. Would they eat him too? I wrapped my head in the covers, only to hear, see, smell nothing more. The next morning the old woman brought me my breakfast to the bedside. She had great difficulty in awakening me. She did so most unwillingly, only because I had given the strictest orders. At once I thought of the night and the ants. I looked around but saw nothing strange. Had I dreamed all that? I asked the old woman if she had noticed anything during the night. She nodded, smiling. Certainly the Tepigwas had been there. She knew it at once. Whenever her bird screamed at night, Tepigwas had put in an appearance. She appeared highly pleased over their visit. No more vermin in the house. Not a rat or a mouse, not a lizard, a spider, a centipede, lice, or cockroaches. The bungalow had been eaten clean. The Tepigwas were excellent house cleaners. But your bird, your blackbird? She laughed. Him? What could they do to him? His cage hung from the ceiling by a thin wire. No, he ate the Tepigwas. That was the reason he was so glad and screamed when they came in. She had gathered a couple of handfuls of them and brought them in. A few that had remained behind lying near a snake, of which nothing but the skeleton remained. Poor snake, thought I, such a beautiful animal, with his blue markings and golden eyes. I had caught him a few days before in the forest and put him into a wooden box under the steps leading into the bungalow. But now I must get up. My guide was below, waiting with the horses. When I came back in the evening, all would have been washed up. Strong scented flowers would be there so that I would not notice that strong odor of the Tepigwas. Since that time I have received several visits at night from these wandering armies. They were never pleasant, but much more bearable than after drinking pulque and writing a sonnet. Those living with us in the house, the insects of all kinds, rats, mice, and reptiles, must perceive the odor of the oncoming army of wandering ants before we do. At least they become greatly excited before humans see or smell anything. They try to escape, which is not so easy, for the Huns absolutely surround the house and enter it from all sides. The wandering ants are also very fond of vegetable food. All seems to be most acceptable, but they will not touch sugar or anything sweet, of which all other ants are especially fond. They prefer meat of any kind, and they seem to want to kill their own prey. At least they did not touch dead butterflies and other insects that I had left lying on the table. In the tropics, many astounding stories are told about ants catching and eating large animals such as dogs, horses, asses, leopards, and apes. Of my own knowledge, I know only that they have caught and eaten a live hen and a medium-sized pig. Yet, I consider those stories probably true, especially if those large animals were enclosed and could not run away. The oft-repeated story that these ants have devoured boa constrictors alive is more than possible. This gigantic reptile, after devouring a large animal, lies enormously swollen and helpless in the forest. Its very hard skin is stretched from within so that interspaces appear, which the ants can easily attack. Their almost exclusively meat diet explains the carrion-like odor of these ants. But there is another puzzle of which I have no solution. That the males and queens of these wandering ants do not share this odor, but have a sweet, rather pleasant odor. Yet it is quite certain that their diet, like that of the workers, is almost exclusively of meat. Some other problems bearing upon the life of the wandering ant are still to be solved. We know hardly anything about the females, and what we know about the males is doubtful and often contradictory. Males have been observed marching in the army. They have also been observed flying at night towards a light, whence came the conclusion that they, like many other insects, leave the nest at night to swarm. Hard as it is to find the permanent nest of the wandering ants, it is easy to discover their camping places, used only for a short time, as they make these in hollow trees, stumps and holes in the earth. The real nest, if we may speak of it as such, consists at such times of themselves, very often. Their facility in building, utilizing themselves as the stones of the structure, is fabulous.